Soundies, welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today's the 22nd of August, 2021, and I hope everyone's had a good week out there, done some fun things as far as sound is concerned. To our friends in the Northeast US, I hope you're staying safe, and let's go ahead and dive into our agenda for today. So we'll switch over there. First of all, you'll notice we have an exciting new way of presenting our agenda with some waveforms in the background. We might have some time at the end to talk about that a little bit. But today's session, we're going to focus first of all on sending audio from mixer to a camera or a switcher. And what spurred this is I get a ton of questions about this pretty much constantly. But secondly, I did a live stream at work this week with my team, and we had a good live stream overall. We had one little area where we could improve, which kind of touches on this area, so we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And then once we're done with that, we'll come back and get the pre-submitted questions as part of our Q&A session, and then we'll go to the chat. So, all right, first let's go to the overhead camera, and let me just show you what I have here. So we have a MixPre 3 here, and what I want to demonstrate here is making sure that you essentially calibrate the levels between whatever mixer or recorder you're using and the downstream device, whether that's a switcher, a camera, or whatever it may be. So in our particular case with the live stream we did, we had it set up such that there were two participants at remote locations. And so in the main studio, we had our CEO, and he was talking into a mic that was connected to our Sound Devices 833. We routed that into a Scarlett 2i2, and then that went into the computer, which also had a capture card and brought in the video image. So that's how we had that set up. And one of the tricks was, I think we had calibrated everything ahead of time, but then somewhere along the way in all of the wildness of getting prepped, I think the gain knob or something had been bumped, on the Scarlet, and so things were a little off there. But I just want to run through how you would go about calibrating those levels just to make sure that everything carries through okay. And the problem is, or the problem you're trying to prevent when you do this is while you might have your levels just right on your recorder mixer, if you don't calibrate those levels with your switcher or your camera, then what ends up happening, or what can potentially end up happening, is you can end up clipping in the camera, or you can actually end up clipping earlier somewhere in the signal chain before it gets to the final destination. So it's just really important to make sure that you keep these consistent on the mixer and also into the downstream device. So in this case, we'll go ahead and switch over to our Mac where I can show you the UI. We're using an ATEM Mini Extreme. And what you can see here, I actually have this channel muted, but the mix pre is coming in over here on mic input number 2. And in fact, I have a little app I'm going to run here that might help a little bit. Toggle hotkeys, F6, okay. Kind of helps a little bit, but anyway, you can see over here, we're on mic channel number 2, and right now I have that muted. But what I want to demonstrate here is that when we have our levels, when we have our gain stage all fixed up and working the way we need it to work over on the mixer, and let's switch back over to the overhead here. So I have a microphone here connected, and we're coming in peaking somewhere right around minus 12-ish, and that's about where we want to be for our stream, let's say. So what I need to do is make sure that that's what we're getting also on the ATEM. So if we switch back over to the Mac, let's see, we're not quite peaking at the same levels, or are we? We're not 100% sure, and it's really hard to tell just by having someone talk into a microphone and watch the meters. The meters each behave a little bit differently. Obviously, dialogue is pretty peaky, if you will. I mean, it changes a lot. So what we want to do is instead we want to use a tone to send a certain level from the mixer and then make sure we're getting that same level on the downstream device, in this case the ATEM. So let's switch back over to our mix pre here. All right, so the way we can go about doing that is we're going to come into the menu here, and we're going to go to the second menu where we have tone. And in this case, we have a few options here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn tone on. And we have a couple of options. We can just send a continuous tone, and we can choose the level, in this case on the mix pre. So if I come back to the main screen, you can see it is sending audio. It's actually a 1 kilohertz tone at minus 20 dB. Now, one of the questions that come up sometimes is, why is it minus 20? Well, I think the main idea for that is that a lot of analog audio gear is optimized to, to have your levels kind of averaging right around that level. And so I think that's the main reason for that. All right, so we have minus 20 on the mix pre. Let's take a look at the ATEM and see where we're at there. Well, you can see on the ATEM, and actually I wonder if I can zoom in. I can't really zoom that in, but that's falling substantially below minus 20, probably by 4, maybe 6 dB. So what we need to do is come back out to the mix pre. And I can't show both of these at the same time, but this is what I would do here. On the mix pre, I'm going to go to my outputs menu because I have, I should explain all this here. So over here on the left, this is the line out on the mix pre. This is a little 3.5 millimeter TRS cable that goes from here into the line input on the ATEM. And actually, let's switch back over. Danny's getting a workout today. Switch back over to the ATEM here. In the audio settings under General, you can see that mic input 2 I have set to line. Now, whenever you can, it's best if you can send a line signal, in my opinion, because then you don't have the receiving device re-amplifying the signal. And so you basically bypass the analog part of the input device on downstream, so in this case the ATEM, and instead all it's doing is taking the audio signal and converting it to digital. That's all it does. So that's how we have that set up there. All right, now you'll notice here our meter is still not hitting minus 20. So I have come into the output menu on the mix pre. We'll go back to the mix pre now. So I have this stereo out gain option. And I can actually come in here and increase the gain. And while I'm doing that, I'm watching the meters over here on the ATEM. Now let's switch back over to the ATEM. I've added 3 dB of gain on the output there, and you can see now we're coming in right around minus 20. Now I can add 4 dB of gain, and it looks like it probably jumps up to about minus 19. I can't tell for certain, but I'm going to play it safe. We're going to just add 3 dB. Now we have that tone sitting at about -20 there. Do you want to hear what it sounds like? Let's be prepared on your volume. It shouldn't be too loud. It's at -20, but here I'm going to go ahead and turn it on just so you can hear what it sounds like. Okay, so that's what it sounds like coming through. But now we have those two calibrated. So what this means is that when we come back over to the mix pre, we'll come back over here. So I've just added 3 dB of gain on the output there. I can now come in here and turn off that tone. Come into the tone menu and turn it off. There we go. And now you can see when I'm coming out here, I'm on my microphone again, so we're peaking right around -12 there. If we switch on over to the ATEM again, as I talk here, you can see we're also peaking very close to -12. So that's how you want to calibrate the levels, just to make sure that the gain stage remains consistent throughout the entire audio signal chain, and that you're not robbing yourself of headroom on your downstream device. Now, one of the questions I am pretty sure I'm going to get is, well, that's neat. That's how you do it on the mix pre. How do you do it on the Zoom F6? Or the, insert any other name of any other recorder or mixer here. So let me just show you here. We're going to pull out an F6. We can go ahead and switch over to this, Danny. And we'll get this focused up here. So I'm going to go ahead and plug into the output on the Zoom F6. This one's its battery has run out. So I'm going to refocus here. It may shake a little bit. There we go. So we're going to just skip the date here for now. Okay. So things work very similarly on the Zoom F6. Let's pop into the menus. We're going to go to the output menu. We're going to go to line out, and then we can go to level. And we can do a similar thing here. So in this case, we have a tone, but they actually hard-coded, it looks like. I don't think there's a way to change it on this one, at -6 dB. So it's going to be always at -6 dB. So that's what we have there. Let's go ahead and switch on over to the ATEM. Oh, that's coming in pretty hot there. That's coming in at about -2.5 or -3 dB, somewhere in there. So let's switch back over to the Zoom F6. What we can do is come here to the line out, and we can actually change the setting. So we can drop that down. And I'm going to go ahead and drop it down until on my meters in the ATEM, we're at about -6. And so I've decreased it by 3.5 dB. Let's switch back over to the ATEM. We're now at -6 there. So that's how you would approach it on the Zoom F6. And go ahead and switch back to the F6. Of course, once we're done with that, we come and turn off the tone, and then we're ready to go. All right, so that is how you go about calibrating your levels. Now, it works basically the same way. We can go ahead and switch back over to the main camera now. Basically works the same way with whatever you're using downstream. So in our case, we're using a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2. I would just need to get some meters up on the screen on the computer and do the exact same thing. So that's basically how you go about making sure that that works, so that you get consistent audio and you're not scratching your head mid-stream while someone's saying all of your audio is is clipping, so something's wrong, and you have no idea what's going on because the meters on your recorder are showing it's fine. So that's how that goes. In fact, this comes from Rick Veers, is the author of the Location Sound Bible and I believe the Sound Effects Bible as well. Commandment number 4, thou shalt tone up thy camera or recorder. Yeah, so this is really a fundamental of production sound and live sound, and any other cases where you're reinforcing sound or recording sound, and you're using multiple devices and interconnecting them to send the audio signal chain through them. So it is a good, I'd say commandment number 4 is a good place to put that. Yeah, definitely resonates there. All right. Any questions on that? Yes, Hante. In the ATEM software, why do you have the level at around -7 instead of 0? Why don't we switch back over to the ATEM? And you're right. I'm seeing this should be back up here. We did that manually. Are you talking about this one here? This one is down a little bit because this is where the music was coming in. You can see we've actually attenuated the gain by 25 dB, plus we pulled the fader down a little bit. So we're getting audio. In this case, we are coming in at microphone level. from a mobile phone. And that's a pretty strong. So basically, a headphone output from a mobile phone is generally going to be what's considered, well, headphone level. It's a little bit lower than consumer line level. So we could switch to line level, but if we did, in fact, let me just do a little bit of this. So I'm going to switch to line level on mic input 1. That's where the phone is connected. Okay. Now I'm going to start playing music on the phone. Okay. You can't hear anything, so I'm going to crank the gain up. Now we're starting to hear it. Okay, now I've pulled the fader up as well. So that's the most I can get out of it if I set it to line level and crank the gain to +6 and pull the fader up. So if I do it at mic level, instead, the music's still playing. There's mic level. Put it somewhere right around there. So hopefully that makes sense for why we had that set up the way that was set up. That's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. Yeah. Oh, mic 2? Was it -7 dB? Well, these meters, I was looking to set it to -6. If I went one level up, it was actually closer to 5. I went one level down setting on the Zoom F6, it went to either -6 or -7. These are not the most precise meters, so if I'm going to err a direction, I'd rather err for less than more, because that way I avoid clipping. So usually I get it within 1 dB. There's another question here from Mike. Why adjust your output level rather than your input gain? In this case, I generally do that because the gain, the overall quality of the circuitry is generally better on the audio gear versus the ATEM switcher. So if I'm going to use one of them to compensate, I would generally rather use the audio equipment to do the compensation. That's generally how I'm doing it. So for example, on the mix pre, when we had to bump it up by 3 dB, I'd rather use the amplification within the mix pre to do that versus the ATEM, just because I think you're probably going to get better quality. It's worth testing. Maybe it would be better the other way. Maybe there's no difference. But that's just the way I approached it there. So good question, Mike. Thanks for that. All right. Any others? Good. All good. All right. Let's go ahead and switch on over to the pre-submitted questions we had for today. Let me talk about our new setup here after we get through the questions. So first from Lewin, I'm currently recording a podcast with the Mix Pre 6.2. I was wondering how I could be able to connect a headphone amp so people could monitor their levels while on the podcast. Let me just pull a little something up here. We'll go over to our Mac. Probably what I would do, Lewin, is I would look at something like this. So this is the Mackie HM4 desktop headphone amplifier. You can see that you get volume controls for 4 different sets of headphones. Obviously, it has some power. It comes with an AC adapter. And then what you do basically is you connect the headphone output from your Mix Pre to the input of the HM4 here. And then you can plug in 4 sets of headphones, and everyone has independent control of the volume of their headphones. So this is probably one of the more, I would think, one of the better ways to go ahead and do something like that. Not terribly expensive. This one comes in at $40 US. This one looks like it's out of stock currently, but there are others available out there. It does require power, so I don't know if you're podcasting on a mobile basis where you don't have access to power, but if so, just be aware you do need power for this. Several other companies make them. Behringer has one here you can see, which is even less expensive. I'm not quite as big on Behringer gear. They tend to focus on price versus quality generally, but they do have some decent stuff too. They do okay. But basically the same thing. Again, it needs power. Let's see, do they have a back view here or a side view? Here we go, back view. So again, you have 1 input and then 4 outputs. So same thing there. There are other companies that make them. I think Samson has one here at Sweetwater as well. Yeah, there's another one from Samson. Behringer makes another one here. So this is one that I would probably take a look at here. This is probably the most cost-effective one that's probably pretty decent quality. So that's how I would approach it, Lewin. Hope that helps, and best wishes on your podcast. All right, next up from Mike. Mike had a question about last week's live stream. For those that didn't see it, we had a guest on. Our guest was Doc Justice. He is a production sound mixer, and he talked about some of his experiences, how he came up into the world of production sound, starting actually as a DJ, which was kind of a fun story. But let's go ahead and let's see. Mike's question is, last week's live stream with Doc was very good, both from a content and technical quality perspective. Are you able to give a brief rundown of how that was achieved? Specifically, how did you bring Doc's audio and video into your live stream? Yes, so we used StreamYard to combine everything. If you excuse me just a second here, let's get that out of the way. So StreamYard is basically a cloud-based service. And what happens is all of the participants in the live stream open up a web browser, specifically Chrome, and connect to the StreamYard service. So basically what happened is I sent him a link specific for our live stream. He clicked on that link, and that connected him to StreamYard. Give me just a second here. I need to take a sip of water. They have a UI. As you can see, here's a little demonstration of what the user interface looks like. All of the people who have connected to the stream will show up down here. You can add them to the actual stream here. So this is basically preview or inputs down here, and you can add them into the stream up here. You get a variety of different layouts. So you have a 1-up, a 2-up, a 2-up cropped, a 3-up, a 1-up with a screen share, a 2-up with a screen share, or just a straight screen share. What's also nice about this one is that you have comments. So when the comments come in, so for example, when someone puts something in the chat, you can actually bring that into the stream as a lower thirds. This allows you to do various branding as well. So any graphical assets or motion graphics, you can bring those in as well. There's also a private chat for the participants within the stream so they can all communicate. Of course, what happens is each of the participants have to have their own technology set up so that they can get their basically a webcam feed and an audio feed up to StreamYard. And so in my case, I was using the ATEM Mini Extreme. I'm not sure what he was using on his end, but he had a microphone and a camera connected via some sort of capture card, and that's what he was using on his end. So we used the ATEM on my end here because rather than put the assets and the music into StreamYard, I already had them set up on my ATEM, so we just used that. So for example, the slide that we show at the start of the stream, but while we're playing the intro music, and the slide that we play at the end, and the outro music, that was all in the ATEM and controlled from the ATEM. But you could also put that up here in StreamYard. I don't use StreamYard as much. I generally just use it when I have a guest. So it's a pretty good way to combine things together. The nice thing is the participants don't have to download any software. Even the host doesn't. You just use Chrome. You can actually stream to multiple places at the same time: Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Twitch. What else can I tell you about it? It's pretty good. Not bad at all. What else can I tell you? They have business accounts and they have individual accounts. You can actually, I think, stream for free if you do a pretty simple stream here. I actually paid for a little bit more so that I can get the additional participants. There was something else here. I can't remember. I think it had to do with the number of hours. And I think it had to do with at one point it had to do with resolution. You could only do HD if you were at this level. I don't know if that's, I guess maybe that's only at this level. In any case, there are different levels here. And there are also accounts for business, which have they kind of changed the billing for business. And I think they may have a few additional features, like they have encryption and things like that for business as well. So without, this is not, they're not paying me to talk about this. I am a paying customer of theirs, so that's the service that we use for that, Mike. So hope that helps a little bit. I'm assuming that on his end, he didn't have any sort of elaborate setup. In fact, we had one person comment that they weren't very impressed with his audio setup, but he was, from my point of view, he was just, kind of focused on the content at that point. And he probably had a little boom mic in up above the camera is my guess. So, all right. Thanks for that question, Mike. Next up from John, I'm wondering if you have any insights or opinions on using the Atom X sync, especially with the Zoom F6. Let me just run through that. So first of all, let me just start by saying I have not used Atom X. We do have some at the studio at work. We just haven't had an opportunity to use them yet, haven't had a need to use them yet. But for those that are not familiar with it, it is an Atomos product. The Atom X Sync is basically this little module that plugs into the back of the Ninja 5 HDMI recorder. And it is essentially a fully functional wireless timecode generator. And in addition to that, it also has a battery sled there, so you can power both the Atom X Sync and the Ninja 5 at the same time. What it does is it communicates wirelessly with the other timecode, what used to be timecode systems, but I guess we now call them the UltraSync timecode generators. So here's the UltraSync, and here's the UltraSync Blue. So specifically, John's asking about using this with the Zoom F6. And with the Zoom F6, you could actually go either way. With the Atom X Sync, you could go with an UltraSync and connect that via cable to the Zoom F6, or you could go with an UltraSync Blue, and that would connect wirelessly with the Zoom F6. So either way would probably work. The idea here is that these communicate, so the Blue and the UltraSync communicate wirelessly with the Atom X Sync, so they're always rejamming with each other on a consistent basis. I think every second they rejam, basically. And then what the Blue would do is communicate via Bluetooth to the Zoom F6 and pass that time code on. And again, it also resyncs or rejams periodically with the F6, so it stays in sync wirelessly. So pretty neat little system for time code. I don't have anything to offer beyond that except an explanation of how it should work. I haven't used it yet, so I don't have any firsthand experience with it, but that's the idea with it, John. If anyone else has used it and has had a good or bad experience with it, please share in the chat. We'd love to hear about that. All right. Let's go back to our questions, actually. I want to talk a little bit about this. So here is our new setup. You might be asking, maybe you're curious, maybe you're not, but we are using again, an ATEM Mini Extreme, and the ATEM Mini Extreme has this super source option. So I can put my screen up here, plus I can put the iPad right here that you're seeing, and configure the sizes and the positions of them. What the ATEM cannot do, though, is play a video as a background. It can just show an asset as a background or an input as a background. And in this case, we're actually playing back a looping video from our HyperDeck into one of the inputs on the ATEM Extreme, just so you have an understanding of how that works. So that's how we got there. All right. I think that's everything I wanted to say about that. Let's go to the chat and see if we have any questions there in the chat for us to talk about today. So far, the HyperDeck did well. Seems like I didn't see any hiccups there. Just has a 30-second loop on that video. It just keeps playing it in the background.
Okay, there are two parts to this one.
Two parts to this question from Brian. When I connect a wireless Go in channel 1, I do not have to turn up my gain so much, but in channel 2, wireless Go, I do. I checked at the dB on wireless Go, so help? Question mark. I meant when I connect those mics to my MixPre 10.2. Well, my guess, Brian, is that you have the wireless Go 2 set to, I don't remember the exact terminology they use, safety track mode, maybe? Sounds like it sounds like it's sending a backup of channel 1 to channel number 2 at a much lower level. So that would be the first thing I would check. Go ahead and plug in both transmitters and the receiver, and make sure that you don't have it set to that mode where it sends a safety channel or safety track. That's what it sounds like. That's my best guess. All right. Thanks for hosting these weekly educational sessions. The pleasure is mine. Thanks for coming. It's good to have you here. Rob, it's good to have you here as well. Here's our friend who does, I didn't get to read it. What did Rob have to say?
Good things.
Howdy, Curtis and Danny, for your coffee and tea fund. Thank you very much. And thanks for being equal opportunity on the coffee and tea. I'm much more of a ginger tea person, and Danny actually does both tea and coffee. So Camille says, are you going to buy one of the new Blackmagic goodies? HyperDex camera. Is it worth the buy? I don't have any specific plans for that, just because there's nothing there that I don't have the capability of doing with the current kit that I have. But they look. I did watch the live stream where they introduced the new products. Well, I kind of had it on in the background while I was doing some other work and checked in every once in a while, so I didn't get to watch it super carefully. But from what I saw, it looks like some great new products. The new HyperDecks look nice. They're smaller. They're more powerful. They looked really neat. The web presenter actually looks pretty cool as well, so it could fit into a lot of workflows. But I don't have any specific need for any of those right now. The ATEM Extreme and the ATEM 2 ME Production Studio 4K Hyper, whatever that thing is called. We have that as well. We don't generally use that one nearly as much. But yeah, I think they're worth the buy if they fit your workflow, for sure. Blackmagic has been going crazy lately. If I can also say, not that I have any need for this or any interest in this particular camera. I did used to have an Ursa Mini Pro. They also now have the Ursa Mini Pro 12K, and the price just dropped dramatically. So it's now the same price as the Ursa Mini Pro G2, which is the newer version of what I had. So if you're into shooting with a lot of resolution, that's a pretty amazing new deal. All right, next question from Karina.
There's a bit of a conversation going on about this, so there's a couple parts.
Okay, a couple parts to this. Is it bad for post if you keep changing the gain? It's because the actors kept switching up their voice volume. Well, they'll have to automate it. I don't think it's necessarily horrible. Generally, if you're working on something scripted, you should generally get an idea of, you should have a pretty good idea if they're going to change their volume at all. If it was unscripted, that's a different thing altogether, in which case, yeah, you may have to adjust the gain. I prefer not to ride the gain during production if I can avoid it, but sometimes you have to. I think that's the short version. So if you have to, you have to. But yeah, if you can avoid it, I think it's best if you can avoid it. Yeah, Post does that, but in adding those noise-reducing element, would the speaking voice be constant if the gain kept switching? It just makes a lot more work for them. Having been in both situations, I prefer, not to change it if I can avoid it. And again, for scripted things, you generally can. For unscripted, it's anybody's guess as to what's going to happen, so you just have to be careful. If you're using high-quality gear, remember that it's okay to leave quite a bit of headroom. They've got very clean preamplifiers if you're using a quality microphone as well with a low noise floor, a low self noise floor. Then leaving plenty of headroom is a fine strategy on the newer gear. So don't be afraid to leave plenty of headroom to absorb massive changes in volume from the actors. I did a piece a couple of years ago now called The Army Nurse, and there were some pretty dramatic changes in volume where the main actress or actor went to screaming quicker than I had anticipated. And we were able to handle it because we left plenty of headroom. So it did start hitting up against the limiters a little bit, but that's what you have limiters for as well. So that's my take on it generally. Omed, I have some hiss on Rodecaster Pro's headphone outputs. Not very loud, but noticeable, even when no mic is connected and all headphone knobs are turned all the way down. Does anyone else have the same problem? It's been a while since I used the Rodecaster Pro. I don't remember that specifically. I wasn't looking for it. It's not unusual. When you don't have microphones connected, I wouldn't use that as a test in and of itself. You always should have microphones connected. Some preamplifiers actually do make a good bit of noise when you don't have anything connected, just because they're not in the state that they're designed to be in when you're actually recording. So I don't know if it's problematic through your recording process. Maybe that's more of a technical issue you'd want to contact Rode support on. I think there is a little bit of hiss, as I recall. I didn't find it to be unusable, but yeah, it wasn't perfect. There was some hiss in the headphones. Hante, if you are one-man band video plus audio on corporate video interview, how do you mount your mix pre in a bag, on your body, or on a camera tripod, or else? Me personally, I leave it in a bag and it usually sits on a table. because for me, for most corporate work, I am doing seated interviews, so that's generally how I do it. If you're doing a walk and talk, that's a different thing altogether. With a walk and talk, I think you really need more than one person in most cases. At least that's how we usually do it. So in that case, someone will have the sound bag, another person will be operating camera. And if you're doing a walk and talk, you definitely need to probably have more than two people because someone needs to be spotting for at least the camera operator. The sound person can usually take care of themselves, but if they're booming, then they probably need a spotter as well. So safety on the set is important. Don't do anything crazy. So those are my thoughts on that. Some people mount them to the tripod. Some of the recorders you have to be careful, or sorry, they mount them to the camera rig, whether that's on a tripod or on a like a shoulder rig. I have found that the mix pre, you have to put some insulation between the camera, some cameras and the mix pre. I think the GH5 is a great example of that. If you don't put that insulation, you can get a lot of sort of a ground loop kind of a situation going. And then some people have had trouble mounting the things like the Zoom F6 because it has these legs that come down. You can see it right here. That can get in the way of some tripods if you mount it underneath the camera, which it's made for doing. It has a little bracket that goes up top here. A lot of times what I do, and this is rare for me, but if I do have to attach this to a tripod, for example, I'll use a friction arm instead. I will not attach it directly to the camera. I will instead connect a friction arm to this and a friction arm, the other end of the friction arm to the tripod if I can. So something to think about there as well. Ken, do you know if a Sonella OSIX2 suspension mount will work with the DPA 4018C mic? I don't offhand. Let's just take a look over here at our friends at True Audio and see what they say. Whoops. I'm already in the mix, so I don't need to do that. Sonella OSIX-2. I'm not familiar with their product line, to be honest. I've not used their products. And let's see what True Audio comes up with here. I would think the 4018 would fit in here. This is for short shotgun mics. You know what I would do is I would just call Gotham. I think, Ken, you're in New York, if I'm not mistaken, but I'd call Gotham Sound, or if you wanted to call True, they should be able to answer for sure. But my sense is this is made for things. There's the 4017 in there, right there. Just to give you a sense of, that'll give you a sense of scale right there. I don't know what the length of the 4018 is. Is the 4018 the really small one? Let's take a look. The Super.
4018C.
Yeah, C is the preamp. Here we go. Yeah, it's the really short one. So it's like the 8050. You could fit it in there. You probably want to go with a smaller one. I mean, yeah, that's the tiny little mic, like the MKH 8050 that I use. I'll be honest, I generally don't use the 8050 inside. And so you're going to be using a super cardioid outdoors, it sounds like. If you can, ideally, a smaller windshield would probably be a better choice, just so you have, you can get it in as close as you need to. But it would certainly fit. I just think have a lot of spare room, which would limit your ability to get that in as close as you might like, depending on what you're doing. All right, Chris, two-part. Okay. Watched your review video of the Zoom F2 and saw you plug the F2 into the Rode Wireless Go. I was under the impression that the F2 output is only line level and the Rode Wireless Go input is only mic level. Also, is it possible to plug something like the Rode VideoMic NTG into the Zoom F2? Thanks for all you do for audio. Two things. No, the output on the F2, I believe, is a headphone output, so you can adjust it. So just like we demonstrated earlier here, You have professional line level, consumer line level, and then you have headphone level, and then you have mic level substantially below that. So I believe that's a headphone output. So yeah, you could adjust that down, and you should be able to make it work. It's not the perfect solution. It's not really made for that, but you could potentially do it. Could you also plug something like this, the Video Mic NTG into the Zoom F2? You should be able to. I didn't specifically test that before I gave the F2 away, excuse me. If anyone has that combination, I'd love to know whether or not that works. I think I've heard of people doing that. I know certainly Video Mic NTG into the Wireless Go 2, but I'm not positive on the F2. The only hesitation I have is that the Video Mic NTG has that little TRRS connector, and it does its little communication with the device that you plug it into to figure out what it is. And sometimes that works in most cases, but there are a few cases where it doesn't work. I would be surprised if it didn't work, but you should probably get confirmation from someone who's actually tried it for sure. But good question, Chris. Ken. OS X2 was originally designed for the Schoeps CMC6 MK41, so that's a longer mic. Yeah, agreed. And yeah, based on what we saw there in the picture, I think, again, probably best to go with something smaller if you can, but you can make it fly, I think, as well. It's expensive. I mean, those are, what, $700 for the for the windshield? And if you have to buy multiple of them, that gets really expensive really quickly. So I understand why trying to reuse them would be a good idea. Mike says, have you checked out the new Rycote Nano Shield? Let's take a look. I have not specifically. Rycote Nano Shield. Let's see what True Audio shows us here. There we go. Oh, interesting. Okay. It's not a lot cheaper, but it is smaller. So it uses this interesting cover here. So sort of a honeycomb kind of structure with a material, like what looks like a sock stretched over it. This is the honeycomb structure here. I presume it's a little bit smaller, so they're probably doing some things with materials that are somehow more effective in terms of cutting wind. And then they have the the traditional wind jammer that goes over that. It looks like maybe they have redesigned the shock mount a little bit, so it's all componentized. You can kind of break it down and build it back up if you needed to. Oh, they put a high-pass filter on the XLR connector, which is interesting. That's new, I believe. At least I don't have that on my shock mount from Rycote. So, no, it looks pretty neat. Looks like a nice step forward. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, Mike. Appreciate that. Shoji, what do you think of the new Blackmagic Studio cameras? They seem like the perfect complement for the A10 mini series because of the camera control. Yeah, absolutely. If you are doing live streaming a lot, it seems like a pretty good choice. To me, that makes them more interesting. The thing that the only challenge, the main thing that I don't like about the Blackmagic cameras, and I've shot with several of them, the 4K, the Pocket 4K, Pocket 6K, the Ursa Mini Pro. They're great. They produce nice images from my standpoint. One of the challenges earlier on, I don't know if this is still an issue. I didn't experience this issue with my Pocket 4K or Pocket 6K, but the original Ursa Mini Pro, my brother also had one at the same time. We did some tests, and the color coming out of each of them was different, even with the exact same lens. So there's something funny I think they had about calibration with some of their early models that it just wasn't quite right. There were some things they were still working through. The newer generation of cameras coming from them, I have not had any of those issues. So it looks like they're, it's not hard. I mean, it is hard, to make and manufacture to design and manufacture cameras. And I feel like I suspect they're getting to a point now where they're getting enough experience where they've made a lot of the mistakes and learned from those mistakes, so they're getting better and better. The studio cameras look really interesting. If I had a need for one, I would certainly buy one. The downside of the Blackmagic cameras, of course, relative to other camera options out there is, while they are a lot less expensive, they basically have no autofocus. So the autofocus is one-touch autofocus, which means you touch the screen on this part where you want it to focus, and it goes get focus. So it takes about that long, and it's not something that you can use to track someone during a shot. You really need to use a follow focus in that case. So if you don't want to use a follow focus, now the nice thing about the new ones is you can control the cameras, and I believe you can also control the focus in the app. So that makes them a lot more compelling from that standpoint. But if you're doing anything with moving, people that are moving substantially, that's where they get a little bit more challenging, unless you're going to use a really small aperture to, really deep depth of field. So those are my thoughts on those. I wouldn't hesitate if I had the right situation where I needed something like that. Sheriff Logs, does the MixPre have good preamps, or do they produce a lot of hiss like the cheap Zoom recorders or Nikon camera? The MixPre have much better preamps than certainly than the Zoom H series recorders, and absolutely versus the Nikon, at least the Z6, which is one that I have, which I use for still images. It has probably the noisiest microphone preamplifier I have ever used on a camera. So yeah, the MixPre is leagues above that, definitely, and it's clean. You don't have to worry about your preamps in the MixPre making noise. You have to worry more about your microphones in that case. Documentary in Progress asks, for a documentary I'll be recording bird photographer on in a windy area, and I need advice on audio setup. I have a wireless lav I can plug into the C100 Mark II and an f6 with an NTG4. Well, what kind of advice can we give you? I would probably, are you going to have someone operating sound, or is it going to be the same person that's operating camera? That's the first question I have for you. Second question, do you have to have the audio recorder connected to the camera, or do you have the freedom of having, again, a separate sound operator operating independently, and then you'll sync in post? In that case, I would route both of the audio to both the wireless and the shotgun microphone to the F6, and then do the mix in post. But I just need a little bit more information about what you're trying to accomplish there. And another question is the lav for the birder and the shotgun for capturing ambient sound. That's another thing that would be interesting to know. Sonoga, any recommendation for the best on-camera mic for a DSLR? The Rode VideoMic Pro Plus is probably one of the better choices in terms of having an on-camera mic that has a good shock mounting system plus replaceable batteries. The next generation that came out after that, the Rode VideoMic NTG and the Deity D3 Pro, both have inbuilt lithium-ion batteries, so you can't change the batteries. So those are kind of the downside with those is that once they run out, you have to recharge, or once the battery is exhausted permanently, then you have to send it back to the manufacturer for a battery replacement. So the funny thing is that both those manufacturers I think actually Deity said they'll have a battery replacement program. So if your battery fails, you can send it back and they will replace it. As I recall, Rode has a really good warranty, and they're usually pretty good about honoring that. I don't know what that looks like for the new generation and I don't know what the warranty is specifically on that. So let's go to the Rode website and let's take a look at let's see, video and on camera, VideoMic NTG. Let's look down at support. What is the warranty? Register your warranty. No, we're not going to do that. It depends on the product as to what the warranty is, and I don't remember specifically what it is for that one. On a lot of their higher quality mics or more expensive mics, it's a 10-year warranty. On some of the newer, more consumer grade things, and probably including the VideoMic NTG, if I had to guess, it's either a 2 or a 5 year. It gets extended if you register your product, but I think it's usually like a 2 or 5 year. And anyway, so I would say, Sonoga, to answer your question, I would probably go with a VideoMic Pro Plus, just if you are the type of person that doesn't want to mess with an internal battery that cannot be replaced by the user. If you're okay with an internal battery, I would probably choose the Deity D3 Pro. That one just sounded a little bit better to me than the VideoMic NTG, but it's probably a little bit of a toss-up between those two. So those are my thoughts. Brian, tea time. Thank you. Appreciate that. Camille, thanks so much also for the super chat. We appreciate that. Karina, any tips for people starting out in mixing for films that come from a more musical background? You know, that's a great question. We do have some people in the community that definitely come from that perspective. My friend Lloyd Puckett, I don't know if he's here today. Have you seen Lloyd in the chat? No, he was here last night. We did an accidental live stream last night. He was there last night. But he comes from a very strong background in music. He did that professionally at the start of his career. I would say what I found is actually a lot of production sound mixers come from the music background. Doc Justice, who we talked to last week, was a DJ. A lot of the others that I've talked to, Michael Wynn, had a lot of studio experience, like music studio experience and Pro Tools mixing with music. So that's where he came from. And really for them, it was just a matter of jumping in and learning the ropes. It's not too much of a stretch, to be honest. Like you might do gain a little bit differently. I would think one resource worth looking at is a new book called Behind the Sound Cart by Petrushka. Let's pull it up here real quick. Going back over to True Audio. Behind the Sound Cart. She has experience as a utility, a boom operator, and as a mixer in production sound. She's been doing it for decades. And she has a new book. This is the book here. But I would recommend taking a look at this. The Location Sound Bible by Rick Veers is also a worthwhile one. It's a little bit older, so some of the gear information in the Location Sound Bible is a little bit more dated. I think Petrushka's will be a little bit more updated because hers just came out earlier this year. But these are good books to look at if you're looking to make that switch over to the production sound world from music. So hopefully that helps for you. Hante, on wireless system, can you set the sensitivity on the transmitter and output gain receiver on the recorder you set level? How do you know what's the optimal level on everything? Excuse me. That's a good question. It depends on the system that you're using. Some of the more professional systems, you will set the gain at the transmitter, and then on the output, you'll go line level out into the mixer, and you'll set the input on the mixer to line level in. So you shouldn't generally have to change things there. That's generally how that'll work on the pro level systems. I would do the same thing even on the prosumer level systems, like the Sennheiser G4 system, for example. I would set the output to 0. Well, I'm not sure how those work now. I haven't used the G4, but I think definitely the consumer and some of the prosumer systems, the output is actually mic level, so you have to regain in the recorder as well. So what you're going to want to do in that case is get the input level on the transmitter set so that you're peaking, depending on what you're recording. If you're doing unscripted, you probably want to leave a good bit of headroom, minus 15 dB. If it's scripted and you know it's not going to, people aren't going to get screaming loud down to a whisper, then you can probably gain it up a little bit higher. But then you'll also have to do the same thing on your recorder. Once you get the output, you'd go with the, like a 0 dB output generally. And again, it's going to depend from system to system. 0 dB output on the the receiver, and then you'll gain back up in your recorder, so that again you have the levels peaking somewhere around minus 15, minus 12, whatever you set it on the transmitter. So that's the general idea. On the pro systems, a lot of those now have digital outputs on the receivers, or they have slot systems with digital outputs. So those are already converted to digital and go straight into the recorder, and you don't have to adjust the trim at all on those. So that's the general idea. We need to know more specifics though for what you're, the specific system you're talking about. Mark, did I just hear you say you don't use the MKH 8050 inside? What do you use instead? I know I typically use it inside. I don't generally use it outside. And I may have misspoken, so I apologize. But to clarify, the 8050 is almost always my indoor boom mic. The 4017B is almost always my outdoor shotgun mic. Camerahead Studios. Where can we find some good royalty-free sound effects and music? Well, there's freesound.org for sound effects. Music, I don't know. I work with MusicBed, so I get my music from MusicBed. And at work, we actually have a composer. One of our staff members composes music, so he composes some of our own and actually hired an orchestra in Prague to do some of the recording for some of the music that he composed. So that's my experience. If anyone else knows, though, there have been a number of YouTube creators who have had videos about free music and sound effects, especially music, recently. Trying to remember who did those. Gerald Undone might have done one. I can't remember. Maybe DSLR video shooter, Caleb Pike might have done one. I can't remember for sure. But there are some out there, so definitely do a search on YouTube. Techno Cheesecake. Soundly is a nice piece of software for some free sound effects. Thank you for sharing that. That's good to know. There's one answer potentially there. Thank you, Keith. Tea, coffee, all good. Whatever your preference might be. Follow-up question. I am a solo operator. Advice is mostly which microphone to prioritize for the voice. I have the Rode Link Filmmaker kit. I can mount the NTG4 on the camera, but connect to the F6. Thanks a lot. Okay. I do have the option of someone helping as a boom operator with the NTG4, but she's a relative of the photographer with no audio experience. Well, the reality is that if you put a shotgun mic on your camera, it's going to sound like it's on a camera, which means it's going to be far enough away that it's not going to sound great. So I would probably prioritize, if you're going to operate by yourself as the only person, then you're probably going to need to optimize for the lav mic is going to probably provide the better sound for you. Depending on your camera, I don't know if it's worth going into the F6 or not. If you're using something like a Canon C100, 200, whatever, I would probably just go straight into the camera. I wouldn't mess with the F6 because, again, you've got a lot going on. That's my personal take on that. Unless you wanted to add the ability to record in 32-bit float on the F6 so that if things get louder than expected, you have that as a backup recording, and then you could also feed that audio out to the camera, and that becomes a sync source for you. So there are different philosophies on that. If you are confident that you have the gain set right, then you can do away with the F6 and then you don't have to carry it around. But if you do, then I do use the F6 and you'll have that backup and you can record a 32-bit float to avoid clipping issues. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. You know, you can, even if somebody doesn't have audio experience, you can train them to maybe do a decent job boom operating. It's worth a try. Lav mics are tricky. You can also run into issues with clothing rustle, especially if, you know, people are moving around a lot, like a birder probably is. So I would get a boom mic if you can, and have the relative of the photographer operate that boom mic whenever possible. That's how I would approach it. I have trained people on the spot in some of my corporate video work at my previous job how to do boom operating, and it actually ended up okay. We had a few issues where we had to do retakes because the boom dipped into the frame, which is, you know, that happens even with people that know what they're doing. But generally, they've done a pretty decent job. So, and that's not to say that boom operating is not an art, but if you're doing it on the cheap and on the fly, you can train somebody to do a decent job at boom operating. Omid, excuse my noob question, and not an audio for video question, but an audio question. Do you have any thoughts on using Warm Audio WA47 Junior for podcasting and voiceover? Well, I've never used any Warm Audio gear, but my understanding is that Warm Audio is basically, they try to emulate classic analog gear, but doing it at a price that's pretty affordable. So for example, here you're talking about the WA47 Junior. I don't know if I think that's a microphone, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, here it is. So it's a FET condenser microphone. I have not used it. You might be better off contacting Bandrew over at Podcastage. He does a lot more of reviews of this type of thing. This one I have not used, and he's actually used some warm audio gear before. I think he's also used some of their higher end stuff. The preamplifiers look pretty nice as well. So I think they have a, wow, 80 dB of gain. That's a lot of gain. I think they are using transformers. Yeah, they use a custom Car Hill transformer, at least in some of them. Looks like all of them. So you're going to get that kind of Rupert Neve kind of sound is the idea I think they're trying to emulate there. So in any case, yes, I think this company seems to know what they're doing, but if you want specifics on that mic, you probably want to check in with Podcastage and see if he knows anything about that particular one. Probably a fine choice for podcasting. Mike, I am both a contributor to and user of Freesound. Recommended, definitely recommended. We were able to pull some sound effects from there fairly recently. In fact, I went to some paid sound effects libraries and couldn't find what I needed, went to Freesound and actually found what I needed. So really depends on what you need. Is this our last question? I just got the cue that this is our last question from Southpaw. What did you learn this week that you're most excited about? I don't know that I learned anything about new gear or new principles or concepts necessarily, but I learned in the live stream that I did at work some things that we need to have in place as contingency planning and risk mitigation to ensure that if we do run into problems on future streams, we're prepared to fail over quickly. So that's the thing that was most exciting for me this week. We'd love to hear what other people learned this week as well from a sound and production standpoint. So, all right, everybody, thanks everybody for joining. Hope everyone has an opportunity to do something fun with sound this coming week. Get out there and make some great sound, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Take care, everybody.
so far